welcome to FO Talks. With me is Joseph Olmert. He is a dear friend. He is a regular author at Fair Observer. He's an Israeli. He served in the Yom Kippur War. He's also an academic. He teaches actually in southern US, I believe South Carolina. Don't you teach in South Carolina?
South Carolina, that proved again to be a bastion of the Republican Party in these elections.
Exactly. And we are recording this in the early hours of the morning, after getting very little sleep. It is Wednesday, the 6th of November, 2024. Donald Trump has not just won the Electoral College vote, he has won the popular vote. The Republicans have won the Senate. They're doing all right in the House. It is a historic election, and on this morning, or the morning after, let's dive straight in. How do you look at the election, Joseph, from an Israeli point of view?
Well, first of all, I would have to tell you what I read and hear from the Israeli government and the people around Prime Minister Netanyahu, and apparently from sources close to Netanyahu, which means Netanyahu through his, surrogates. They're very happy. They're very relieved. There was a lot of suspicion and fear about Harris and the fact that she was surrounded by people that were not so friendly. Also, the choice of Waltz as the vice president, not of Joe Shapiro, the Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, which might have cost her Pennsylvania, that's another story, was taken by many Israelis to be an indication of things to come. You have to understand, of course, that whenever the Israelis make their opinions about situations in other countries, one word coming up immediately into the discussion is called anti-Semitism, or, the fear that there is anti-Semitism at display.
But isn't her husband Jewish? Isn't her husband Jewish?
Yeah, but, he's never been involved in Jewish affairs and, didn't have any impact in anything connected with Israel.
But you can't accuse a woman of anti-Semitism if
I didn't
her husband
accuse her.
Jewish.
I just said what many Israelis feel. I didn't say that this is
Got it. I'm not saying you. I'm not saying you, but these Israelis.
No, she's definitely not anti-Semitic, not at all, but the decision not to choose Joe Shapiro created bad impressions in Israel, and by the way, among American Jews. And I already starting having some indications that could have cost her a lot of votes in Pennsylvania, though she lost much bigger than just what would be the change in Jewish voting there. So, But the point really is that the sense I gave you about what Israelis feel may be based, and that's the main point I would like to make here, may be based on false impressions about what is going to happen with Donald Trump in his second term. In his first term, definitely he was very pro-Israel. There's no question about that. I don't want to waste time to repeat all the things that he did that were taken to be pro-Israel. But that is not going to happen necessarily in the second term. And there are even historic precedents. I'll just give you one that not everybody pays attention to. Ronald Reagan was a great, great supporter of Israel. Ronald Reagan, in his last days in office, he recognized for the first time the PLO. If you even remember that, the PLO, and because he wanted to facilitate the road for his successor, George H.W. Bush, and all that, So I'm not saying that Trump necessarily is going to repeat it, but in his second term, when he doesn't have to be reelected again, that was it, he might have different opinions about what he would like to see as his priorities. And he already indicated to it in his speech about ending wars rather than starting them. And I think that if we talk about Gaza to start with, he will allow Netanyahu a window of time for Israel to so-called finish off the military job in Gaza. But as soon as he is sworn in, he will start dealing with a political solution in Gaza that will not be pleasing to the Israeli right wing, because it will be based on the idea of Palestinian participation, not Hamas, but the Palestinian Authority in all this and other countries in the running of Gaza, and limiting the role, if not even not having any role for the Israeli military in controlling Gaza, even militarily. And that remains to be seen, but I won't be surprised if that's going to happen. So as of now, there is honeymoon in Jerusalem. They feel like, we are out of the immediate problem of what would have happened if Aris was winning. But time of reckoning will come and we'll see.
Excellent. So much so for the Israeli perception and what Donald Trump could do. Now, explain to me and explain to our audience how has the Jewish community in the US divided over uh, the support for the two political parties, and B, even over the um, Hamas and Hezbollah war.
Well, look, according to polls taken among American Jews, over 90% of American Jews showed support to Israel in one way or another, and the number of Jews that were explicitly in polls anti-Israel was 5 or 6, I saw. So don't be impressed with groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and all this. They are really vocal, but very, very small, and not influential. Never mind the noise
I
they
see.
make. Yeah, the problem really is not the problem. The reality is that the Jews traditionally were Democrats,
Yes.
and that the big majority of American Jews concentrate in states like New York and Los Angeles and in California, where even though they are a bigger portion of the population than in other states, they are not important electorally speaking because these are democratic states. So these elections, maybe for the first time in decades, Jews could be influential in places like Arizona, Phoenix, or Atlanta, Georgia, and Philadelphia, Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. And I would say to you, Atul, very carefully, very, very carefully, after just starting to look at data, that the Jews this time voted less democratic than ever before.
Mm.
And at least in some places, people specifically said it's all about Israel this time. The point
Well,
really is,
Steven Schwarzman came out in support of Donald Trump, and so
oh
did a
yeah,
number
not
of
just him,
wealthy
Bill
Jewish
Ackman, Steven
individuals
Schwarzman,
in
and
the
others.
US.
Yeah. And the Ederson family and others. Look, the problem really is that the Jews felt uncomfortable in the US in recent years because of the growing tide of anti-Semitism. And as much as one could put some blame on Trump, by the way, you need to know that after Charlottesville, I wrote a strong article against Trump. So, I mean, it's not like, it was a genuine sense of many Jews, Israelis, and others. But most of the anti-Semitism, let's face it, did not come from the traditional white supremacist or white racist, whatever. It came from the left, from the woke
Mm.
movement, and from their supporters in the Muslim community, which is not the entire Muslim community, God forbid, but some of them. And the feeling was that Harris now, and even Biden before, did not do enough to deal with it. So
Mm.
that created a sense of uncomfortability among American Jews that might have translated itself more if the Republican candidate was not Trump. If Nikki Haley was
I see.
candidate, over 40% of the Jews would have voted for her. I can assure you that.
I see.
So I think that the Democrats in that sense have to take into account that if you want to appease Arabs in Detroit, you can still frustrate Jews in Philadelphia. And there's a very delicate balance here. And, these are elections. These are the numbers. So that is it. I mean, you can talk about it. I can talk about it, but the numbers give you the picture.
Yeah. So a very good line. If you want to please Arabs in Detroit,
Yeah.
you will displease Jews in Philadelphia.
Or in
And
Los Angeles, and of course in other places. And I don't know, maybe it affected 1 or 2 congressional seats as opposed to, say, the overall national picture, or more than 1 or 2 seats. So, remains to be seen. But I read already stuff in which in various places Jews said specifically on election day, today it is all about Israel. So, it's a problem.
all right. So what I'm picking up is two things. One, that um, the divisions of the old world have come to the new world. Arabs in Michigan vote out of loyalty to their brothers and sisters. Jews in America vote out of their sense of loyalty to their brothers and sisters. So that's one I'm picking up. The second thing I'm picking up is that Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu's team is quite happy with the result, and so are members of the Israeli right. So, what happens now? Do they go all in? Do they hammer Hezbollah harder? Do they hammer Hamas harder? Do they strike Iran? What are they now going to
That
do in the
these are the
lead up to
questions.
January 20th?
Great questions, of course, because these are the immediate issues. I just read before I came to talk to you that there was a Hezbollah rocket falling around the Ben Gurion airport in Israel. And I would like to tell you, look, Hezbollah are playing with fire. To a large extent, what happened until now to Hezbollah may have been the promo. And they are in danger of being totally extinct because what happened last night, but also because of the fact that Netanyahu fired Defense Minister Gallant. And now Netanyahu basically rules the operations through a nominal defense minister who is his own, somebody, Israel Katz, who is a Netanyahu guy. And Netanyahu cannot therefore blame anyone else now for what's happening. He will have to do now what he claims he said behind closed doors, and Gallant did not like to hear. So I think that,
And what has he claimed behind closed doors?
okay, he
What has
says,
Bibi Netanyahu
yeah,
claimed behind closed
he
doors?
says, and that's what he says, and I cannot verify it. He says that he wanted to do more and he was restrained by Gallant, which means that now that he is in charge, he will do more. And I need to tell you, you interviewed me about Hezbollah in our previous time. And around that time, I wrote an article in which I said, until now, it was September, I believe, Hezbollah, or before, Hezbollah is having the strategic edge. More Israelis were evacuated. The Israeli North suffered enormously. They dictated the course of events in the North, and it's about time for Israel to make a crucial decision. Are we going along with it, which is a victory to Iran, or we finally tell the IDF, go out and do whatever you can do? And you know what the decision was made. So we are at the same point now. I think that now Netanyahu may feel that it might be time for him to think seriously about ending these two wars in the south and in the north. And that means using much more military pressure. Gaza, look, Hamas is finished militarily. They still fire a rocket or two. So, but they're finished, Hezbollah is not yet finished. And the Iranians threaten. So the Iranians are now the ones who have to make the big decision. They need to decide now how much risk they're going to take if they attack Israel again, when there is Trump in the wings, and when the Israelis proved last time when they attacked Iran back that they can paralyze the entire defense system of the Iranians against aerial attacks. And this is the change of the overall strategic configuration tool. Why? Because until some time ago, Israel had to make all the big decisions. I think that now when the Iranians are the ones who will have to make the big decision, that's a strategic change. And therefore, we'll see what happens. The Iranians can attack Israel, but I can tell you, the strike back this time will be different than the previous one, even though the previous one was very little.
Yeah, I mean, you could strike the oil ports, you could strike the nuclear sites, you could start assassinating key figures.
Look, let's
There are
talk
many,
about the
many
oil.
options on the table.
Let's talk about the oil. You own
Mm,
a car, you would not have liked to pay more for your petrol because the Israelis attacked in Iran, and that could have changed the election results. They don't have this constraint now.
yeah.
And nobody can tell them, don't attack oil installations in Iran because it could cause us damage if you're the Biden Harris
Yeah,
administration. For example, I'm not saying that I know anything. I'm not saying it's going to happen. But you know what? It's more likely this time than before. And the Iranians can brag and talk and threaten and all that, but they are exposed. They
yeah.
are
Now,
exposed.
now let's examine this a little further. Karg Island, very vulnerable, not far. I've heard from IDF sources that Karg Island is considered a target.
You don't need to
And
hear it from anyone. It's logical.
yes,
It's
it's logical.
yeah.
Exactly. Now, let's talk further. All right. Yes, Israel can hit Iran, and yes, maybe Iran is a brittle regime, it'll implode. That is the thinking of a lot of Israelis that I have met, including from your intelligence services. But what they also say is that Israel has a vulnerability against ballistic missiles. That is something Israeli sources admit. Now, you say Iran has all the risk, Iran has to make a strategic calculus, but Israel also has huge risk because, in some ways, Israel has achieved a lot of what it wanted. Hassan Nasrallah is dead, the commanders of Radwan Force are dead, Fuad Shukr is dead, Yahya Sinwar is dead. I could carry on. Yeah, of course, Yahya Sinwar is Hamas, not Hezbollah. But the point is, both when it comes to Hamas and when it comes to Hezbollah, and perhaps when it comes to Iran, uh, Israel has achieved its key goals. And now escalation might be a risk for Israel.
Well, but the escalation will not come from Israel, it will come from Iran, and that's their decision to make because they are now
I
the
see.
ones who threatened to attack Israel. The Israelis said after the attack, the retaliatory attack before, that
Yeah,
this is the end. And, if the Iranians therefore will go out
got it.
for a big ballistic missile attack, definitely one or two missiles can penetrate, or 5 or 10, out of 200 that are launched
Yeah.
and cause damage. But the counter damage would be, look, much bigger, trust me. And look, the real problem is that the Israelis are not looking at the current situation. Not the problem, the reality is, put it this way, the word problem is a problem in itself. The reality of the Israeli calculus is they do not see the current situation as the final battle with Iran. They still maintain the option of the final battle when they believe that the nuclear program came to a point where it had to be stopped or else.
Hmm.
And they maintain a lot of capabilities for this one.
Understood. So Israel's top priority is to strike nuclear sites or to assassinate the senior figures
No,
of the
no,
nuclear
the
program.
nuclear program, the nuclear program.
Yeah, exactly. So that is it. So key thing, don't let Iran get bombed.
Look, the Iranians are threatening so much that if they don't do anything now, they will look weak. And that's the tragic logic of brinkmanship politics when you have such systems that are so different, not just politically, but culturally. I mean, psychologically, and all that comes with it. And you understand what I mean. So I am very worried about what the Iranians can do. But if I was Iranian, knowing the situation, I would be more worried. I
Understood.
used to say to people, I had a Lebanese student that was pro-Israel, Christian, American now, Lebanese American. And he told me, look, but Hezbollah can do whatever in the first wave of rockets at Israel, and God forbid what can happen to you guys over there. And I told him, look, the problem would be the second and third waves, that
Mm.
Hezbollah will be decimated. So the Iranians need also to make a calculus based on the importance of the nuclear program for them.
Question, what are they going to do? What is your estimation? You've been a
My
senior figure in the
estimation is
defense
that
ministry.
they're going to cause trouble that could range from attacking a Jewish whatever somewhere to
Mm.
a ballistic missile attack on Israel using the so-called missile that they haven't yet used until now. And
Do you think they will go for the ballistic missile route?
if they don't do that, how more effective can they be than what they already were?
Mhm.
So Hamas is basically decimated. Hezbollah needs to bear in mind any more rocket falling around the Ben Gurion airport, and you know what can happen. Naim Qassem, the new leader of Hezbollah, needs to be very worried, of course, if you understand what I mean, and so on. So look, yeah, there could be whatever. By the way, there was a story that you saw in the press. There was a picture of a heavy Israeli destroyer crossing the Suez Canal on its way to the Gulf, which indicates to another Israeli option. I hope nothing will happen. Look, I don't want anything to happen, but the Iranians will do something, yeah, and they will do it. They
Okay.
will do, and
Despite the fact that Trump has won.
maybe because of it, because there still is another president.
Got it. So till January 20th, they can try something. Now
Until
let's
20th January, we are in a very dangerous period now, because that is also, as I told you before, indicated before, the time that Trump can say to Netanyahu, that's your window of time, because as of the
is till January
21st of
20th.
January, it's up to me to tell you what to do, because I want to start with a open plate, empty plate.
Clean slate, empty plate.
Yeah.
Okay. So your estimation, Donald Trump is going to give Bibi Netanyahu a free pass till January 20th.
Well, I don't know
We are
how
in
free, but
risky
yeah.
times.
Yeah.
That's your estimation.
Yeah.
So your analysis,
Yeah.
and we are living in very dangerous times until then. Now let's focus a little bit on Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, as he's popularly known as in Israel. Now Bibi has proved to be relatively popular since the war. His popularity actually went up. He was in crisis. There was a constitutional crisis about appointing judges. There's obviously a scandal about, shall we say, a little bit hush hush off the record on the QT, a corruption scandal dogging him, and of course he was out of power for a little bit, but like a cat, he has 9 lives. He's back. Uh, what does Donald Trump's victory mean for Bibi Netanyahu politically?
Look, everything you said is right. I would say that he still hasn't recovered his popularity the way it used to be. I don't think so, but even the poll don't show it. But yeah, he is on his way up. But as of last night, when he almost formally, but practically took over the control of the military situation from the defense
It's
minister.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Donald gets elected and he takes over the
Well,
defense
but he
ministry.
fired him before he knew about the results. He might
Okay.
look the way his mind works, and it's difficult for me to be precise about that. My sense is that he somehow took into account the risk that proved to be worthwhile for him, that Trump is going to win. And but look, forget about that. He now is in control. I can't blame anyone else. As I told you before, I hate to repeat myself, but what does it mean really? It means really that he can also surprise us all by being more moderate and flexible now, in order, for example, to put the pressure on Hamas about the hostages. He will declare unilateral, he can say, a unilateral ceasefire in Gaza. And promise, I understand now they talk about $5 million to everybody who would bring at least one Israeli hostage. He can do that. He can do whatever he wants now. There is no political problem in Israel inside the Knesset. And yesterday night, when there were demonstrations in support of Gallant against him, they were not as big as they were expected to be, and mostly in Tel Aviv and not in other parts of the country. So remains to be seen. Look, Netanyahu now is in a position where he may feel, see what happened. Everybody was against Trump, he was elected. Everybody is against me, I'm around. And you're talking about human beings.
Yes, of course.
Before they're politicians, they have their own character and all that, And I don't know. If Netanyahu feels that somehow the overall course of events in his favor, I would have to be very worried in Beirut these days before I make a decision about escalating against Israel or even the Iranians.
So Netanyahu, you think, is in a strong position. He could now become more flexible. He could
He
become
could if he wants.
uh,
Yeah.
he could become more unpredictable even.
Yeah.
And what does that mean in terms of Israeli political life? Because a lot of people see him as a figure who has weakened Israeli institutions, who has brought in the far right into the fold, who has been a divisive figure, not
He has
just
been. I
politically, but
agree. He has
culturally.
been. He has
Mhm.
been. That's what I think personally. I wrote about that, so I can say it also.
Yes, absolutely. You've been
Yeah,
a
he
critic
has
of
been, but there's a big
Bibi's.
but.
Hmm.
You know how war start, and this war started very badly to him. The circumstances of ending the war could still be conducive to him. Though again,
Mm.
look, it wasn't like the Yom Kippur War when Israel finally made later peace with Egypt. There was a state to make peace with. Who is the
Hmm.
partner in the Palestinian side? It's not clear, you know. So here is where Trump coming to the picture. Here is where America could play a role by encouraging the Saudis to enter the process, you know. And
Mm.
Netanyahu, in that case, could be more moderate because he will say, look, now that Hamas is finished, the Palestinian Authority is not a military threat, you know, and the Saudis are in. Here it is, you know. I really finally bring an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict, and then we
So,
can
so
deal with
you, so,
Iran.
so, so that
He
means the
can do that.
Qataris will be. So the Qataris, where Hamas is based, Hamas is based in Qatar. The senior leadership, the Qataris will be cut out.
Look, I never understood why they should have been in the first place, but that's, you know, I need to tell you a little episodal note about that. Way back, way back.
Yeah.
In a forum in Washington, somebody who represented Al Jazeera, never mind the name, said that, you know, we want to extend our operations to the US to talk in English and so on and so forth. And I asked him a question. I said to him, look, uh, what is your reaction to the fact that Sheikh Kardawi, in the meantime, he died? On Friday night sermons on Qatar, on Al Jazeera in Arabic, talks about killing Americans and Jews. You know what he answered me? Well, you understand, of course, because you dealt with the media, that in Qatar, they need to tell people what they like to hear. So Qatar played, to ask me, a very bad role, but they were chosen to be the conduits by Netanyahu for all kinds of reasons which are not clear to me, in giving the money to Hamas and trying to bribe them and all that, you know. Who needs them now if the idea is to work with other Palestinians that they didn't work with until now? So they
So
might be
hold fire,
losing
hold
their
fire.
role.
Our listeners don't know this bit. A lot of the money that was going to Hamas before October 7,
From
2023,
Qatar, yeah.
the day when the attacks happened, came through Qatar, and Qatar has played a very important role in the Middle East as a broker, not just vis-a-vis Hamas, but also vis-a-vis the Taliban. The biggest US base in the region is in Qatar, and Qatar has tremendous soft power. We saw it in the World Cup they hosted for football, FIFA World Cup, and also because they back Al Jazeera. So they've had a massive role, which is far outsized than their geographical size, or even actually the size of their economy or population.
But that's exactly where the Saudis could be tempted to join in, you know, but they need to know that Iran is weakened considerably more than what it has been weakened until now.
I
And
see.
they need to know that Netanyahu would pay them back for this. I mean, with Palestinian currency. And
I
that
see.
could
So
put,
what you're telling me is that you're playing the Al Sauds against the Al Thanis.
I need to play it. I need to play it. It's there. You know, it's there. You know, and you know it and I know it. So the Qataris may see their role soon disappearing, but A lot again depends on the Americans. And as you said, there is this 10,000 strong Air Force base in Qatar and so on and so forth. And, and maybe Trump will have his own ideas about that. But I think that Trump is more tuned toward the Saudis.
I see. Now, importantly, the Iranians have threatened to strike oil facilities, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in the United Arab Emirates. Remember that much of Saudi oil is in the eastern province, which is
Assad.
largely Shia,
Yeah.
and the oil facilities of the Gulf states are incredibly vulnerable to Iran. So, will they take a risk, the Gulf Arabs, and in particular the Saudis, and will they finally act as the broker between Israel and a Palestinian entity, whatever it is, in the post-Hamas future?
Look, talking about the Iranians, if they really want to commit suicide, let them attack the oil installations in Hassa, and that will be the end of their oil industry as well. I mean, they
Mm.
look. One thing about the mullahs I need to say, they act carefully and cleverly, and they are dangerous
Mhm.
enemy exactly because of that, because they also have power, and they can use it. And the
So you're saying the mullahs act carefully and cleverly, so they're not
no, no, of course they are,
exactly
but it
unpredictable.
doesn't mean that they are not militant to the point of being understood by us in the West, because they have a different, but they have their own ideas of how to handle themselves, and if they will attack the Saudi oil installation or the UAEs, first of all, it will be an attack on America,
Mm.
not Israel. But then the Israelis will get the green light and the Americans to go after the Iranian oil industry. And you said Harg. How can they defend Harg, really? I mean, they can't defend
You
Harg.
can't.
They can't. So, I mean, that's why I'm saying, look, they have to make the big decision. And in a situation like that, the ones who have to make the big decision because they're more vulnerable are weaker. And that's the change of the overall situation since the Israelis decided finally, after 11 months, to go after Hezbollah.
I
They
see.
waited far
And,
too long, but they did it in the end. Yeah.
yes, and um, our listeners should know that North Israel experienced the evacuation of thousands of
Yeah.
Israelis, and
What do you mean? Almost
Hezbollah,
100,000 people. Yeah.
yeah, Hezbollah started firing rockets on Israel starting October 8th.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was a long time. The war came after a
11
long
months
time.
it took Netanyahu to make
Yeah,
this decision. By the way, according to report, Gallant wanted it much earlier.
got it. Now, but there's the counterpoint. The Lebanese argue that Lebanon is being punished for Hezbollah's sins, and the Lebanese argue, and you and I both have close Lebanese friends, that the forced displacement of 1 million Lebanese is pushing the country to the point of collapse. So they
No
also have an
question,
argument.
no question about that. But then the Lebanese didn't do anything to stop Hezbollah. So look, that's the
Mm,
tragedy of Lebanon, and they were cautioned, and they were warned, and they
mhm,
were aware of what could happen. They just did not feel they had the power to do it. And here is my criticism of the Lebanese, which I have expressed for 40
mm,
years already, since 1982. It's on
mm.
record. The Lebanese could not then, cannot now, or in the future feel that others will have to do the job for them. They are not exempted from doing something for themselves. And if Nabi Berri, a Shi'i, wants now to accept 1701 resolution, 1701, where was he until now? If Jumblat now wants to do it, where was he until now? And the same, the Lebanese forces in the north over there, Jaja and all these people that now are running around and talking about Hezbollah and all that, where were they until now? What did you expect the Israelis? Because of respect to other Lebanese, not to retaliate what Hezbollah was doing? That's it. That's the sad reality of the Lebanese situation. And the problem also is that look at France, for example. Why do I say France? I'll tell you why. Because instead of encouraging the Lebanese before the war started to stand up to their independence and rights, they were quite peaceful because there was no war still. And now they tell Israel, don't do this, don't do that. What what did they expect Israelis to do? Hezbollah started the war unilaterally without any Lebanese reason. Hezbollah proved, and I wrote about that way back, that they prefer sect over nation. That's sad story. All this war is not a Lebanese war. I agree with you completely.
Yeah, so that brings another can of worms. A number of people, including actually Israeli historians, point out that the Middle East is not exactly conducive to a Westphalian European style state because ethnicity matters more, religious identity matters more. It was a mosaic of sects living under the loose rule of the Ottoman Empire. And the Sykes-Picot Accord that created Lebanon, and remember, Lebanon, one of the Hashemites was in Lebanon, and then of course he went off to Jordan.
Yeah, he was in
And
Damascus, yeah, Faisal, yeah.
yeah, so the states, these states are arbitrary. The borders are
okay, I agree
almost
with you, and I
amateurish.
wrote
And so,
about it.
so just let me finish. So
Sure,
to
sure, sure.
expect Lebanon or Iraq or I mean or Libya or any of these states to function cohesively is a
Yes.
mirage.
So when you are an Israeli, whether historian or not, and you know all that, and you know it, so then do you say to yourself, oh, I am such in sympathy with whatever, therefore I will allow them to ruin my country. I mean, it doesn't work like that. And by the way, the Iraqis as well, if they will allow the Iranians to use territory against Israel, they might be in troubles, you know. So look, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And you know, you touch here upon something which is much bigger because it also gets into the way we even talk about the Middle East today in the West and
Or
teach
think about it. Yeah.
and teach about it.
Yeah.
You know what? When I wrote that the Syrian civil war is a sectarian conflict, I was attacked like crazy. Zionist propaganda. They invent this. You know, it's such a toxic situation. You can't even talk about it without immediately being blamed with all this nonsense. You know, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. But that's what it is. That's the tragedy of Lebanon. And should have Lebanon been established
And
in
Syria
the
and
first
Iraq.
place or not? Let's go back 100 years, but we don't. We can't.
But that is the tragedy of Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. In
Yeah,
fact, all
and
of these
Iraq.
post-colonial states.
And, you know, there was a book written after the American invasion of 2003 to Iraq. I can't remember who wrote it, about Churchill's folly that he created Iraq out of, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
I've
wrote
read
in,
the book.
yeah, oh, okay. In 2015, I wrote at my blog at that time at the Huffington Post that maybe Biden was right when he said, let's divide Iraq between Sunni, Shias, and Kurds. But
Yeah,
you know, if you do that, it's a Pandora box because it will break down the entire fabric of the Middle East. So it's not going to happen, and you understand that. But
yeah.
this is all very nice when you do Monday morning quarterbacking. You know, okay, so. You know what,
uh,
Atul, let's think about that very briefly. Think about this famous great book by Barbara Tuchman, The March of Folly.
yeah,
The problem really is to make the decisions the right one in the right time. Retrospectively, we can write books.
fair point. Anyway, so given the situation today after Trump's victory, you expect lots of changes in the Middle East. In his last term, there were the Abraham Accords. And in this term, you expect some kind of deal with the Saudis to be involved, correct?
Yeah, he will have to deal with Gaza, the Saudis, and Iran, including also Lebanon. He has three problems that he might try to connect into one by offering a package deal. I would advise not to do that because the bigger the solutions in the Middle East, the bigger the failure of those solutions is because of all that thing that we have talked about the Middle East. But I believe that in his second term, he is in his mind thinking in bigger terms about his role also. I proved everybody is wrong, I'm right. You know, he's a human being.
Understood. Illusions and delusions of grandeur. Now,
You
one
said it, yeah.
final,
You said it,
yeah,
yeah.
one final point before I go. the focus has been on Hezbollah in Lebanon. The focus has been on Hamas in Gaza. But a lot is going on in the West Bank.
Yeah,
And
but that,
in the,
yes.
just let me finish, in the West Bank, a lot of Israelis, or rather, let's say, a lot of Israeli Defense Forces people are uncomfortable with the way settlers have become more aggressive. What do you think of what's going on there?
Well, the problem is not a problem with settlers, but the problem really is that the 7th of October indicated to people in the West Bank also that they could be
Targets.
yeah, and of course, the behavior of some of the settlers is horrible and terrible, and they should be dealt with harshly, and they are not because of the current composition of the Israeli
Hmm.
government.
Hmm.
But I think, or I suspect rather, that from an overall perspective of Israeli politics, the situation in the West Bank in the end doesn't work against Netanyahu. It does not. Why? Because he can always come out and say, and he will do that, and he does it. You see what happens even in the West Bank. How can we make more concessions in Gaza and so on and so forth, or to Hezbollah in Lebanon? So even if in the polls Likud are still down, when you look at the overall opinions of Israelis, you see that the combination of Netanyahu, the right wing, and Lieberman, and now Gideon Sa'ar, gives about 65% people that could be defined as hawkish and right-wing.
Well, and as one of my secular friends from the IDF pointed out, the religious have more children, the secular don't. And in a democracy, demography is destiny.
As
So
we saw
perhaps
last
we are
night
looking
in
at a more
America.
hawkish Israel.
As we saw last night in America, there is culture, there is demography, and that leads to politics, not the other way around.
Excellent. All right. Joseph Olmert, always a pleasure.
My
Hope to see
pleasure.
you. Hope to see you again. And thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
your time.
Under nice circumstances. Imagine in the Middle East, nice circumstances. That will be a miracle.
Yes, where everyone is playing beach volleyball together.
Take care. Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.